Hi, this is Casey from Android Central, and we have Renee Ritchie from the iPhone blog in the house showing off the iPhone 3G
S.
3GS. 3GS means super speed, right?
Zoom.
So the hardware is still very familiar, right? Everything's the same, basically.
Don't let looks fool you, Casey. We got a 3 megapixel camera in there. We have a Cortex A8 processor. We have Power VR graphics CPU, the SGX version. So it is, Apple says, twice as fast as the 3G.
How much faster do you think it is?
I think it is so much faster that when I go back to a 3G, I regret it.
So basically everything, what has changed basically? Because we already know that the Safari is great, iPod is great.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously on the screen we stole the compass from that you had back on the G1. We were jealous of that. We want some of that augmented reality goodness, so we did steal that. In addition, now if we go back to the camera, it now does video recording, and also right away you see there's a square there, so you can tap that to change the focus, the white balance. Basically, the software is fairly intelligent. It knows what to look at depending on where you tap, and it ends up taking really good pictures, better than the Droid, But yeah, so those things are the primary changes. Also, it's got really good accessibility. Like if you're hearing impaired or visually impaired, there's a lot of that kind of stuff built in now.
And there's also onboard search.
Yeah, so that's the iPhone 3.0. It's got Spotlight search. It's not like your Google search where it searches everywhere. It's mostly localized. It'll find files and
what's on
apps.
your iPhone.
Yeah, what's on the actual iPhone.
Okay. And then basically you have your thousands and millions.
100,000 applications, yeah. And some of them are useful.
So when we go to the App Store, you can search for whatever. It has everything imaginable, right? Basically, the Android market on steroids.
Yeah, it has 5 or 6 versions of every application, and then another 5 or 6 bad versions of that application. Yeah, it's really, like, people say you don't use that many applications, but those applications you do use really does vary from the, like, you had a great basketball application you showed me about that I'd never heard of, and that's really it. There's more of a chance that you'll find those applications you really want.
We're beginning to see the problem with Android market is once we get a certain number of apps, it's kind of hard to start finding new apps.
Yeah.
Like how does Apple plan to manage the hundreds and thousands of applications?
They have shown no signs of managing it so far, and what's worse, the developers have learned to game the system, so they'll do things to try to get attention. So Apple spends most of their time trying to stop people from doing bad things rather than help people do good things. But that we have to figure that out still, because they're predicting 300,000 apps this year, and it's going to become a really big task. Hopefully iPhone 4.0 will solve that for us. And now you have the in-app purchases too, so if you buy a game, you can buy 10 more levels, or you can buy more maps, or you can buy more stuff in each app, and those apps can interact with accessories now too, so it's only going to grow.
So, and everything is handled through iTunes, right?
Yeah.
All your purchases.
It's really, really hard to set up international transactions to buy and sell things, and iTunes has already done that, so Apple's just leveraging that system.
So what great third-party application is there on the iPhone? Because a lot of times developers, they go to the iPhone first, and then eventually some of them, they come back to Android to expand a little bit.
This one's not going to go to Android, Casey, because he wasn't happy with how well your contact app scrolled, but this is Tweety, and it's a good example of a developer finding a need and making a really, really good interface to that kind of an application. So this is your basic Twitter application, but it's just buttery smooth. It scrolls beautifully. It supports all the latest Twitter APIs for retweet, for lists.
Is that a retweet, right?
So if you see a retweet, yeah, you'll see there's a little pink thing on it, and if you tap on it, it'll show you who retweeted it.
Wow.
It'll also show you lists. You can manage your lists on the device.
And you said if you scroll up, it automatically refreshes.
Yeah, which is a very intuitive. It's so intuitive. I try and do it on Safari now, and nothing happens. or on email. It's a very nice example of the kind of passion people put into their iPhone app when Apple doesn't reject them.
Has it been a problem for you? Like, have you noticed quality applications being rejected for apparently no reason?
A little app called Google Voice. Yeah.
There's no Google Voice on.
There were some third-party Google Voice apps, and when they rejected Google's Google Voice app, they took them away.
They wiped out everything?
It was scorched earth. So yeah, I mean, it's a blessing and a curse. I've likened it to going to a really fancy restaurant. You're going to eat what the cook wants, and you're not invited into the kitchen to cook something else. So if you want to go to that restaurant, you've got to order from the menu they give you. And if they don't want to give you something, you're not going to get it. I mean, you can jailbreak. We discussed that previously. If you want to theme it or something, there's always a jailbreak option. But for a stock user, you're stuck in the Apple ecosystem.
So your maps, it doesn't have Google Maps navigation yet, or
No,
have they announced anything
They
towards?
say that they're discussing it. We don't know what's going to happen with that. It does have Street View, but that's as far as it's gotten. But if I want navigation, I have to buy like an $80 navigation application, which is nice because the maps are stored locally, so I don't need an internet connection. But at the same time, it's not free as in Google.
That's true, but basically it works.
It works really well. Just Google's gonna maybe make their lives miserable when they give it to free for everybody.
So what's big on Android is customizing your phone. You can sometimes turn off landscape mode. You can sometimes turn off like haptic feedback. You can turn off whatever you want to turn
It
on.
took us 3 versions to get landscape mode. It's gonna take another 3 before we can turn it off again. There's very little. I mean, you can remove apps that you installed. You can rearrange the applications. You can do a few settings, but there's no real customization unless you jailbreak.
Do you think Apple's making it a point to make it as simple as possible?
I think Apple's general method is to do something very basic and then to slowly add functionality. That's just the way that they would prefer to give you something very simple that works very often than something complicated that sometimes breaks down. There's always priorities. There's only so many hours in a development cycle, and that's how they choose to prioritize their roadmap.
So then, iPod on the iPhone is basically the best. Is it still the best iPod?
It's still the best iPod Apple has ever made, and it still syncs through iTunes on the desktop. Although they do let us download podcasts and movies and stuff over Wi-Fi. Under 10 gigs, you can go over the cell network.
Okay.
Which is still AT&T.
And then obviously there's still issues with there's no flash, and then probably never.
There's
will
no
be.
flash for the camera, and there's no flash for the web browser, and Apple seems to regret neither one of those, not in one little bit.
But there is multi-touch, right? That's something that's oddly missing in certain Android phones.
Yeah, like I said, I think Android users are so smart they don't need it, and for iPhone users, we're just naturally touching the screen a lot, so they want us to feel like we accomplished something when we do it.
So have there been any improvements with the Safari browser, or is it just...
Yeah, I mean, Apple is making a point to keep the Safari on the iPhone even ahead of the one on the Mac. Usually it's got HTML5, it's got CSS animation, SQLite. There are web apps now that don't even need an internet connection. You just install them on the phone, and there's a Pac-Man game that just runs like that. So they're really making it a point to keep Safari as far ahead of the development curve as they can with WebKit.
Do you think people will circumvent the App Store and just make web apps then?
There is a movement to do that because some people are fed up with Apple and their App Store rejection policies. But web apps they're great for a certain class of applications, but we're not going to play Need for Speed on a web app until WebGL gets much more developed than it currently is.
And with the iPhone, you can basically install as many applications as you want, right? You're only limited by the
32 gigs on the
32
iPhone,
gigs.
64 gigs on the iPod Touch, and you can put as many. And some of the apps, like Navigon, is 1.3 gigs. Just that one app. So I mean, you can go wild. There are a lot of games that have textures that are a gig, and I think Myst was 700 megabytes. So
wow.
Yeah, you can load it up.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to add about the iPhone, where it is now, where it's going to go?
Yeah, I hope it goes in this screen direction. I mean, I want to get a big monstrous screen like this, and I don't know if they'll handle developer fragmentation, having different platforms to develop for, but I want them to have that problem. I really want that screen, and I'd like them to steal your multi-touch and your notifications at the same time.
All right. Thanks, Renee.
Thanks, Casey.